I'm guessing you clicked on this video because it had gear in the title. All right, let's talk about it. Hey everybody, Chris with Wallowa Hikes. Welcome back. If you're new here, this channel's for beginner backpackers. Now, recently, after about 25 years of backpacking, I've decided to expand my season to year-round, which means I've started to do a little bit of winter backpacking recently. And because of that, I've had to expand my gear because what I use in August isn't going to work for me in the middle of the winter time when it's freezing. So, new year, new gear, and I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've picked up. Now, it's not like I've never been camping on the snow before. So the first time I ever really camped in the snow was on Mount Hood, attempting a summit years ago. And that was a terrible experience because I didn't have the right gear for that. And after that, I looked into some better gear to keep me warmer in the wintertime. And so later on, I camped in the snow again on Mount Adams and when I summited Mount Shasta. And that was a better experience, but I've never really set out on purpose to go camping in the middle of the wintertime. So this year, I decided to purposefully get out there in the middle of the winter to avoid seasonal depression and to experience something new, because I've been backpacking a long time. And one thing that I kind of miss is that whole experience of being new to something. So here we are. So let's talk about the gear. So one of the things I decided I needed to have was a hot tent. A tent specific to wintertime to have a stove inside. And I did a lot of shopping around. I did not want to spend a ton of money because this very well could be something that I just hated doing. And I've said all along, don't spend a bunch of money on gear until you know you're really going to love backpacking. And so it is for me with winter camping. What I ended up getting was a package deal from Danshell Outdoors. Looking at the stoves, they had a package that included a tent as well. And that tent is from Mountain Cattle Camping. And I didn't want a small tent. I wanted something I could stand up in. Like, my idea of winter camping is a big old tent. Now, the problem with that is generally a smaller stove is not going to heat a bigger tent as well. But I didn't want a small tent. So I went with a tent that was 13 feet across and a little over 7 feet high in the middle. It's a pyramid tent. I can stand up in it, and it seemed to work pretty well. Because I'm new, I pitched it at home first. Had a little bit of struggle like everybody does with a new tent. I've learned quite a bit on pitching that since then. And I'm going to go out again and try it again. So I've had some struggles. If you haven't seen the video on my first attempt, I'll link that up here. But that's, yeah, it's been a bit of a struggle, but it seems to be a pretty good tent. Currently, it's a little more expensive. I got it on a Black Friday deal, just fantastic deal. So it has a center pole, a 7-foot pole about, and various stakeout points. I think 12 stakeout points, 8 areas for guy lines to go out. It comes with some cheap aluminum stakes, and those are pretty useless, and yes, unless you're using it in the summertime, which is not the point of it. So I had some snow stakes, used those. Those work pretty well, but it's a spacious tent. And once you figure out how to pitch it properly, it works out really well. It has 2 doors, which is really helpful. And it's around 6 pounds. Now, since I'm going out in the snow, I'm not carrying everything on a backpack. I'm pulling a sled. We'll talk about that in a minute. But so the weight isn't a huge deal, but I definitely like the space that it affords me. It's a polyester tent, so that's not going to sag so much when it gets wet, and that's helpful as well. I will say it's, you know, not an expensive tent. So on that first trip, in pulling out the stakes, I was dumb and just tugged on the tent, and it just tore one of the stake areas out. And that, you know, was kind of my fault, but you can get a much better tent than this, higher quality, but you're going to spend some money. So again, trying this out for the first time, I went as cheap as I could without getting garbage gear. And again, as a part of that package deal, that was the tent and a titanium foldable stove. Now, since I was trying to go fairly inexpensive, I went with Dan Shell Outdoors. This is a titanium stove. It folds down to about the size of a laptop case, which is really great. This is actually something you could bring with a backpack. It's about 4.4 pounds. Like I said, it's titanium, so it's light. And of course, burned it out at home. The stove itself is pretty small, 14 inches long. Now, standard firewood is 16 inches. So I've had to cut wood shorter to fit into it. That's a little inconvenient. If I went with a really good quality stove like Nyko, they make stoves that take standard size wood. And a stove like that's going to heat this tent up a lot better because it's going to put out more heat. But yeah, it's a pretty small stove, just under 8 inches wide. It doesn't hold a lot of wood, so it's not going to burn for a really long time. But it worked pretty well. Has little foldable legs on the bottom. And on that first trip, which was a disaster trip, I got a fire going, and even though it was below freezing outside, I got it up to 70 degrees in the tent, which is wonderful and part of the allure of hot tent camping. But overall, the stove has everything you need. It's got a rotary damper, it's got air intakes in the front, glass on the front, which is, you know, nice for heat, also ambiance. So those are the things I had, which are the core gear you need for hot tent camping, is a hot tent and a stove. And I'm gonna link all of these things below. Now, keep in mind, I got those two things in a package deal, really inexpensive compared to what they are now, but you can shop around. For the price of what the stove is now, I would probably go with a Nyko stove. There's lots of brands out there, but they're solid. Handmade right here in Oregon, if you're interested. I'll leave a link to them as well. All right, so a while back, I did a video about temperature ratings on sleeping bags, and I had a 0 degree bag from Hyke and Byke. That thing sucked. Sorry, Hyke and Byke, but I could not get warm in that thing at all when it was cold out. 0 degree bag, not at all. So after some research, I went with the Kelty 0 degree bag, Kelty Cosmic Zero, because I have the Kelty Cosmic 20 and 40, and I've loved those bags. This bag kept me warm. On that first trip, I didn't get cold at all. I got a little cool on my top half, but not bad at all. This last trip, I was warm. My top half got a little cold, not shivering cold, just threw my coat on at about 4 in the morning. But it's a good bag. It's not expensive for a 0 degree bag. Next trip, I'm going to try a climate bag. Now, if I would have used a sleeping bag liner, that would have helped a little bit when it got down to 17 degrees. This has a comfort rating, not a survival rating or a lower limit rating, but a comfort rating of 17 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's exactly how cold it got on this last trip. And I was fine. And I did not want to get out of that bag in the morning. So it worked pretty well. A good 0 degree bag, and not a lot of money for that. Now, as far as boots go, knowing that I was going to be hiking in the snow, I've loved my Merrell Moabs over the years. So I went back to Merrell and looked for some boots for the snow. What I found was the Karuna 2 mid boot, waterproof, and the right height for me. You can get them taller, but it worked really well. These were super, super, super comfortable. No problems with blisters or rubbing or anything. They're so cushy inside. They're definitely waterproof. The only time my feet got wet is when I stepped into about 4 feet of snow without snowshoes. And these were a really great deal, under $100 for these boots. So definitely a good buy on those. I can't say enough good things about Merrell's. And here's these Merrell boots. These things are so comfortable. Great lugs on the bottom. Great grip, waterproof, so comfortable. I cannot complain, all for under $100. All right, so let's talk about the cot that I brought. Now, if you're camping in a hot tent, heat rises. And so it's fairly important to be off the ground, at least off of the ground directly. So I looked for lightweight cots. There are not a lot of lightweight cots. What I ended up with was a backpacking cot that I got on Amazon. And this keeps you up about 7 inches off the ground. Now, definitely if I got something taller, it would be heavier, but it would probably keep me up in the heat a little better. But this kept me off the ground. It worked really well. It's a little tough to get the brackets in because it is tight so that it doesn't fall apart, it doesn't shift. But it folds up into this little bag. It's rolls up, and it's fairly easy to put together and carry. So this worked really well. It was comfortable, kept me off of the cold ground. And so definitely, if you're going to be doing this, you're going to want to get a cot because, yeah, it's cold on the snow. So that seemed pretty essential. This has worked pretty well. In the future, I might get something that keeps me up a little higher. But again, looking into a whole gear loadout for something I haven't done before, I couldn't spend a ton of money because I don't have a ton of money to spend. So this worked pretty well. It was under $50 and it seems durable and yeah, worked really well. With all of this heavy gear, there was no way I was going to be able to carry it all on my back. And even if I could manage that much weight, there is not enough space to carry everything. So watching a lot of videos, especially like Rob Pelton, Miyagi, those guys go to Minnesota and they go camping on frozen lakes in the wintertime. And they get their gear there in what's called a polk sled. And some of you that watch this channel, I know you're familiar because you've given some great information on this because it's what you're into. And so that's helpful for me and everybody else. But I wasn't going to spend hundreds of dollars on a sled for winter gear. What I found was a kid's toboggan at a Goodwill store. And it was 75% off that week. So I bought this sled for $3.50. I modified it by drilling holes so that I could put cord through for attachment points. I put some eye bolts on the front so I had attachment points to pull it. And hooked up carabiners to that. I bought some PVC pipe, 10 feet, cut it in half so I had 5-foot lengths, crossed those in the middle, actually used a hair tie to keep those together, and ran paracord through there. And so I had something to pull it with that's going to be stable because those are crossed in the middle. And when I'm going downhill, it's not going to run over me because the PVC pipe is, you know, solid. And so it worked really well. On my first trip, going through terrible conditions and pulling through frozen troughs of snow, I broke carabiners, and it was a terrible experience. It was not a good place to be doing that. So after that trip, got some more robust carabiners. Everything else worked just fine with that. And on my last trip, this was great. I was going uphill the whole way. It took some effort, but it slid great. I was able to control it great. I was able to pull it with no problems. And I had a ton of gear in there. And I just went to my local Bi-Mart. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bi-Mart, but here in the West, kind of an everything store, but they have a lot of outdoor stuff and hunting things. And I just got this strap that I attach the carabiners to. I can put it through my belt loops or just around my chest or waist. And that's worked really well. And I can just step out of it when I'm done. So the toboggan was great. Now, if I was in super deep snow, I'm not sure how well it would do, but so far, $3.50 and some hardware I had laying around the house. I can't complain about that. And there's plenty of videos on how to make your own sled out there. And we can talk about that more if you want. But again, keep in mind, as far as winter camping goes, I am a beginner. This is a channel for beginners, and during the wintertime, what I'm doing now, I'm a beginner. And I'm doing what I did as a beginner backpacking, and that's going out, trying things, finding what works, finding what doesn't work, making mistakes, and learning from them. And then coming back, seeing what I need, what I don't need, what I didn't use, what didn't work, modifying things. This is the best part of backpacking. It's getting out there, learning, and growing. So, this toboggan, $3.50. Yeah, it's working so far. Now, the thermals I used the same bottoms on both trips. And I never got cold from my waist down. The first trip I used a different brand just because I'm fat and the other ones were pretty snug. So the solution to that is I need to stop being fat. But what I ended up using, I got these recently, and I've got all kinds of thermals, have used all kinds over the years. But these are from Blue Star, and I can't recall if I got these at Costco or my local Winco, which is, unless you live in the Northwest, you're not going to have Winco, but these things were super warm. They are not expensive. I didn't use any other kind of warmers or anything, and I stayed warm in 24 degrees, and then on the next trip, 17 degrees, stayed warm. So Blue Star, that's the company. If I can find a link to those, I'll leave that below as well, and links for everything else we're talking about today. All right, a lot of these guys I watch on YouTube have down booties for camp to keep their feet warm. I wanted some of those. I looked around online for those. Those are expensive, but while I was looking around, I found these. Now, these have a little bit of sawdust on them from the trip, but got this pair of, they're slippers, basically. And these are super, super, super warm inside, hard on the bottom. I actually didn't end up using these on the last trip because my boots never got wet inside. My feet were plenty warm, and I just slipped into some socks when I got into the sleeping bag. But on that first trip, I was soaked, my feet were freezing, and having these was great. Problem with these is they're huge. So if you got room to pack them, these are great, inexpensive, keep your feet warm and dry. Again, they take up a lot of space, but until I can afford down booties, this is going to work for me. As far as lighting goes, I didn't bring a headlamp, but I had my Lucy light, the little inflatable that I didn't use for years because I thought it was stupid and gimmicky, and that's come in really handy. Had another like $5 cheap plastic lantern, and got some really cool string lights. Now, these I found on Amazon, and it's a lantern. It's also a flashlight, and if you open it up, it's string lights. Now I'm looking for a way to really attach these and string them around the tent, but so far that's kind of failed, but gives me something to think about and engineer in between trips. But I'm going to keep taking these. They're really, really bright, and make it look kind of cool at night when you got a little stove fire going and you're just chilling out and reading or whatever. So those are on Amazon. They're cheap. I'll leave a link to those as well if that's something that you might be interested in having. They're not terribly heavy. And if you're pulling stuff in a sled, that weight really doesn't matter even a little bit. So that's obviously not all the gear I took, but that's the new gear that I've gotten here in the past few months in preparing to go. Obviously had way more stuff than that. And some of those things I had already. So for instance, a snow shovel. Snow shovel is obviously helpful in the snow. This one, Yukon Charlie's. I found this on Amazon. This has worked really well over the years. Not this one in particular, because on that first trip, somewhere along the way, I lost mine. But cheap enough if you pick up another one. It's compact, but folds out. Used this on Mount Adams, and it really helped me to dig out a spot up there. So something you're going to want to have. There's all kinds of brands, all kinds of styles. On that first trip, I just figured, since I had an old bucket of preen that I was using to carry some of my stuff, I would use that as a seat. Works great. But picked up this little tripod stool at Goodwill. $5. $4. This was $4 at Goodwill. And you can get these online for less than $10. Now, I've got a backpacking chair, but not so good in the snow. This thing, a lot more stable. This worked really good on this last trip. Doesn't take up a whole bunch of space. So got that, you know, and obviously you're going to need gloves and things like that. Balaclava, if you don't know what that is, it's kind of a ninja mask to keep you warm. So all of that stuff, I had most of that stuff, the coat, most of the thermals, things like that. So I'm not going to go into everything. Like, there's people who are experienced who do this all the time, all over YouTube, and they can show you their gear loadouts. And but this is the gear I've got. So far, it's working really well, and it's not terribly expensive, and that's what's important to me right now. If I really embrace this, you know, over time, get better gear. That's going to cost more. But. So yeah, new gear, trying things out, seeing what works, what doesn't, without blowing my budget. And what's really great is I'm learning by trial and error out there, like every backpacker does when they're brand new. I would suggest, if you're brand new, start out in the summertime. But, you know, this has been interesting. It's been fun. It's been cold. And the great thing about this channel, as it's evolved, is that I have found you guys commenting below. The new backpackers and myself have learned so much from your comments. I appreciate the comments. I got a ton of comments after that Blair Witch fiasco, which was my first trip. And thank you. Thank you so much, because I'm learning and I'm able to explore other gear and things that I may need out there to make a better, more enjoyable trip. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Apparently it's dog time.